Todd, my brother, and Todd is going to take us all the way home.
Thank you, Charles. You're the best. Okay, so I'm super happy to be here, and I'm just going to tell you, I've never trended in Slido before. This is kind of a big day for me. I'm sort of freaked out about what to do and where to go with this. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to start with a very quick story. But what I need you to do, and it's a pretty good opportunity to do it, it's post-afternoon, gravity's kind of sucking right now. I mean, you're feeling it a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to say anything about these chairs, because I don't think I have to. But here's what I'll tell you. If the doctor ever comes to you and says, you got 1 week to live, I'm sorry to give you this bad news, I would drive to Vegas, steal one of these chairs, and spend that week sitting in this chair, because it will feel like a year. These chairs are designed for skinny people with big butts. You know who you are, Beyonce. Okay, so if I can, I'd like to take you on a tiny journey. It's going to sort of set the tone for what we want to do, but to do that tiny journey, I'm going to need to tell you guys a little story. So you okay with that? Okay, so what I want you to do is relax. Just kind of let it go. Shake it out a little bit. Feel that pork loin and those potatoes and that huge selection of cauliflower, which whoever picked the menu, I love you. Because there's nothing better than eating a lot of cauliflower and then getting on a plane. Seriously, everyone will enjoy the cauliflower you had for lunch today, just in a different fashion. You know with me? So relax, relax, relax. Now kind of close your eyes a little if you feel okay with that, because I want to talk to you about a camping trip that two very good friends took. It was Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And they're in a beautiful, bucolic meadow. They're sound asleep. It is the middle of the night. And suddenly, Sherlock Holmes shakes Watson awake. And he says, "Watson, my friend, what do you see?" And they're both laying there in this bucolic meadow. And he says, "I'm looking up towards the heavens. And I see stars and planets. But what I really see is an infinite future. A future where meanings will be made and lives will be won. I see the incredible universe that's above us." And Sherlock Holmes says, And Watson says, "What are you thinking, Sherlock?" And he says, "I think some son of a bitch stole our tent." Hold on to that idea, because that's where we're going with this conversation. You with me so far? Now, you know, because every year that I get luckily asked to do this, and it's such an honor to be here to do this, I always use this time once a year to introduce my new bio photo. This isn't it. I mean, that's not my bio photo. That's my new t-shirt design. This is my new bio photo, and I just kind of want to get you guys' approval on it. So this, I think, is going out as my bio. How do you feel about it? Little freaked out, my pants are unzipped. But for those of you that are young, you'll not get this. For the rest of us in this room, I've never really seen a dead bird fall out of the nest. That's all I'm going to say, right? So we're good to go there. Saw you had to hear that. I know it's kind of straight up, right? This idea is going to be, so this photo actually comes from, I was working in Colombia, Colombia the country, South America. And I walked through this lobby, and they had this big pink box that you could take your picture in. And I guess I looked at it enough times, because I did kind of think that would be fun, that finally the little counter person at the hotel said, "Would you like us to take your picture?" And it was that kind of awkward thing where I couldn't say no, so this is the product I got out of it. I wish they'd have told me my pants were unzipped. That would have made it even better, but that's not how this story's going to go. So let's have a discussion, because today is a really important day for all of us. And part of the reason it's so important for all of us is because we're really part of something that's become remarkably interesting and kind of special. And the reason I can say that is because if you would have asked me many years ago, would we be having the conversations we're having with the people we're having them with? I would have probably said no, you guys. Because a bunch of years ago, when we started looking at the way we were doing safety in our organization, we weren't really thinking about moving ahead into a different world. We were just trying to solve problems that really existed. And that's kind of the whole start of this. Nobody, and I think I can speak for many people in this room today, nobody thought this had any kind of future. Because if we'd have thought it had any kind of future, we'd have named it better crap. You know what I mean? We'd have had cool names and stuff, right? I mean, that's what we'd have done. But it just became. And that becoming is really a function of the fact that there was a need for it. And I think the need sort of helps us understand. So what I want to do to sort of set the stage is to take you guys on a tiny journey. So if you will, this is an individual task, but I'd like you to sort of think about this question. What's been the biggest change in this work? Whether you call it resilience, or safety 2, or HOP, or whatever else you call it, performance improvement, whatever you call it. What's been the biggest change in this work in your history? So the reason it says last several years is because I couldn't put last 30 years because some of you aren't 30 years into it. But I couldn't put last week because some people are 30 years into it. So think right now very quickly on this question. I'll give you a moment because this is going to come back up and going to be a pretty important part of our conversation. Okay? Think. Got it? Okay, you're going to need it. Because now what I want you to do is look across the room, look at someone who you think is incredibly interesting, and I want you to partner up with that person. I don't care where they are. They could be at your table, they could be at the table next to you, but I want you to get a partner. I want you to become a dyad. Does that sound official? I don't think it's dirty. Dyad. Okay? Everybody got someone in mind? Okay. Get together with that person. Go. Seems perfect. You seem stupid not to do it, really. Mid-afternoon like this, motion matters. Give people control. I can't play. I'd love to play with you. I'd totally love to. I would have loved it. That'd be perfect. Okay, everybody got a partner? Everybody good? Okay, so let me just check really quickly. Inclusion matters. Anybody alone? Okay, we're good. If you need to make a triad, make a triad. That's good. Okay, the journey we're going to go on now is really simple. If you've not done this before, this is kind of a cool technique. And one of the things I want you to think about this technique is that this technique of gathering information quickly works beautifully. Create partners, pairs. I call them elbow buddies all the time. Create elbow buddies, and then in that partnership, actually give a question. Now, I'm really going to never give one question. I almost always give 3 questions, but I'm going to ask you to have a conversation with each other. And what you're going to answer is this question. Tell the story how your organization's perception of safety and reliability has changed for the better because of the work that's being done in your organization. That's question 1. Now, if you're not following along at home, let me give you a hint why this is such a cool technique. Because I'm going to ask you to take an appreciative approach of what has made a positive change. So instead of saying, what sucks about the work you do, which would be a relatively interesting conversation, let's flip it and say, what's been really successful? And once you identify and tell each other the story of that success, then part 2 of this is what conditions had to exist for this success to happen. So you're going to have 2 deliverables. You're going to listen to a story that's being told to you by your elbow partner. You're going to have a summarization of their success, and then you're going to start to amass a list of conditions necessary to be successful. Now, I'm not going to give you a ton of time, and if we were doing a workshop in our normal organization, we might take 30, 45 minutes for this, but for this, we're only going to take a couple minutes, because A, you're super smart and good looking. Let's just get that out there before we go much further. And B, we don't have a lot of time to play with this, but we'll still get really good data. So, begin. Tell the story. You have 5 minutes. Well, it's California. He's dreaming. What? is this?
It's like a miniature.
Let me back up. How'd we do? How'd we do? Everybody okay? So my guess is, and I could be wrong, I'm often wrong, but my guess is you probably got about halfway through. Fair enough? So you probably got to hear one person tell a story and one person got to tell the story, and that's good. And what I'd suggest to you is this idea of appreciative inquiry, this idea of asking for sort of problem identification by looking at what works well, fits beautifully in the models we use. It's certainly a part of understanding normal work. But what it also does, quite amazingly, is it allows you to sort of skip a few steps and move right into data collection relatively early. Because the interesting thing about the question is not really the story the person told you of the success. I mean, that's interesting for sure. But what's more interesting are the conditions necessary for that success to happen. And one thing we've learned through the years, all of us collectively together, is that conditions are really where the money's made. And that if we're going to understand how to create success, we want to build conditions that lead us to create success. And the crazy thing is that conditions are identifiable, right? They don't really count a lot on people. I mean, they do. We could talk about that later. But they're not behavioral in nature. And in fact, they're observable. You can observe them. The cool thing about asking for conditions, whether you're doing a question on what change looks like, or you're trying to understand a near miss, or you're unfortunately looking at a horrific accident, is that becomes more like a brainstorming session than it does some kind of police inquiry. So one of the most amazing things Nick said today in his presentation, and Nick, it was really good. Like, I don't know, did you notice I was tearing up through most of it? I mean, it was emotional. I mean, if I'd have been Slidoing you, I would have sent you a lot of happy face emojis. That's what I'd have sent you. But one of the things Nick said to me, and I wonder if you caught it, I'm betting you did, is that they sent the pilots through a training to learn how policemen do interviews. What do you think? Yeah, so here's what I would tell you, that the next time you get a chance to do that, send the pilots to a storytelling class. Because you don't really need somebody who says a plane, white in color, right? I mean, we pretty much know what the plane's going to look like, but you do kind of want that context-rich discovery. And so that's an important part of what we created. The quick answer is, what did you hear your elbow buddy say? What conditions are necessary to, in fact, create success? Who can tell me? Before we go much further, though, I haven't been here because I had to do another stupid job. Have you guys been playing with these? Has anyone got up and said, ready? Luke, I am your father. No? I'm super disappointed in you guys. That should have been happening day one, okay? Let's get that out. Okay, what conditions did you hear? Well, what did people say? Yeah, so this idea of supportive leadership is really, really important. When they said supportive leadership, did you ask that kind of second level abstraction question? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Yeah, I know we didn't have very much time, but that question really begs asking for more. What else did you hear? Psychological safety. That's good. So it needs to be safe. I need to feel like I can tell you the truth. I need to feel like I can give a differing professional opinion. I need to feel like it's okay for me to disagree with you, right? So don't let psychological safety go down the C-suite course of we already do that. You know what they're going to say? Hello, I have an open door policy, and we have only the finest candy on my desk. I mean, how much more psychological safe? Well, you have to help them understand that free hugs are nice, open doors are sweet, but when's the last time somebody said, you know, your idea is kind of stupid? And here's why. That's good. What else did you hear? Consistent messaging, super important, because that really helps us build two things. One is it helps us build that language fluency. So one of the lessons that we've learned in the last 30 years for sure is that language matters. We talked about it today. One of the lessons I've learned personally is don't dumb the language down. Your people are smart. They can absolutely understand things like error modality. They get that. Those are important words, and it builds that consistent response. What else? I'm sorry? Oh, there was a need. There was a definite need. That's excellent as well. That's very good, because problems really have origins, right? Problems that aren't really problems aren't called problems. They're called standing meetings, but at least in my world. What else? Training, not policing. That's good. I mean, I think anytime we can say, let's move to teaching from enforcement, we're always in a really good position. So that's good. What'd you say, Nick? More better interactivities? Oh, more or better interconnectivity. Yeah, so when Tony and Jim were up there talking, beautiful job, you guys. I thought you said you guys were wearing spandex. Did that fall through at the end, or did you have it on under your clothes? Oh, you had to rethink that. Okay, because I was a little freaked out by this, and fortunately it didn't happen. But it's so interesting, when you talked about system complexity, virtually all the things you talked about really increase transparency. I mean, the message I would take from you is that the more you understand a complex system, the more the complex system is understandable, the more we're successful in working with it. Anything else? Yeah, I mean, you've got to question old models and ideas. And that's hard, and you want to build sort of a respectful way to do that. That's brilliant. What's interesting to me about this is ultimately, in retrospect, change is inevitable. And the quote I bumped through because I was so excited to show you the Barbie box was that everything is obvious after it's happened. And one of the most important things I think you guys should kind of carry into this is that I wonder, honestly, if we've taken the time to realize how much the world has changed because of the work you do. It's weird. It's almost frightening because your organization doesn't talk about failure the same way they used to. They don't respond to failure the same way they used to. And what's weird is that change is incremental. And the damnedest thing is it's not in one direction. The hardest lesson to learn, Dave, we talked about this earlier, is that kind of change ebbs and flows. And I can tell you safely in this room, all of us are one new senior leader away from starting at zero. But that's not a bad thing. It's just a bounding condition of organizations. So where does this take us? Well, these quotes come from a set of nurses that I was so lucky to get to spend some time with just recently. And it was a group called SPS. And that stands for, Cliff? Thank you. Strategic Patient Safety. I told him I would not remember that word, and I did not. Strategic Patient Safety. If you don't know of SPS, they've been on my podcast recently because I'm so taken with them. But they said, can you come and do a meeting? And I said, well, maybe. if it's someplace cool, because if it's in some sucky place like 110-degree Las Vegas, let me just say this. If you weren't here, I would not be here. Just get that out, right? And they said, yeah, and we'll get you a puffy taco. And if you've not been to San Antonio, let me just ask you to write one thing down on your notes. Write the words puffy taco, 2 words, puffy taco, because if you haven't had one, you're missing out. But we went to this meeting, and they're doing all this really interesting change. I'm going to tell you about this change as we progress through. And this doc looks at me, and she says, our work is different now. Human performance in a children's hospital once was a push, but now it's a pull. And one of the things I'd ask you to think about is that change. Because I'm going to just be honest with you. When she told me that story, I thought, I'd never put it in those words, but it is true. Where I used to have to make my way into a meeting, now I'm often invited to the meeting. And that separation between push and pull, that's a pretty valuable data point for us to carry. She then went on to say, we either are or are not teachers, co-workers, craftspeople, nurses, docs, leaders, or even followers. What we are change agents. And I would suggest to you guys from the very pit of my soul that you're always teaching, you're always communicating, you're always telling stories, you're always listening, but ultimately what you're doing is effectively helping your organization change. And that change is vital. In fact, I would suggest the work we do is not necessarily brilliant. In fact, I'm currently in a big argument with a whole bunch of people over this idea of safety science. We are a science. So the difference between us and chemistry, and I'm just going to pick this out, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, I can handle it, is that near as I can tell, chemistry, they never have a big meeting about fatal accidents. They talk about chemistry, synthesis, making better fat-free potato chips, which, by the way, they've not cracked the code on yet. At least we went through Illustra, which was the potato chip that gave you instant and quite explosive diarrhea, which used correctly is a pretty good tool. The difference we have, and what sort of separates away from the science side of the house, is that there's a constituent of people who, honest to goodness, are trying to make the workplace safer. And they're listening to you. And what's important about us in this room is that we're listening to them. Because we know in this room, the answers live within the group. Because the problems live within the group. And this doc who told me this big change has happened and what we've learned in hospitals is that we're a change agent, I think she's right on target in that discussion. But let's look one more thing change-wise, and that's resistance to change. So the crazy thing about change is that change happens not when your organization has strategically determined it to happen. Let me say that again. The best project plan that says the new software rollout will be Tuesday at 7 a.m., that's a piece of crap. Change happens the moment people perceive the change happens. And one of the most important tools we have is the ability to actually constantly serve as that change agent. But to do that, we have to understand a couple things. And you've talked about them greatly the last 3 days. Martha talked about them beautifully in the midst of a giant blame attack on, what's that thing called, Fido? Philo? Slido, that's pretty significant there, right? And that is that ultimately one of the ways that causes resistance is when we change too much at the same time. And so part of what we have to understand is that this game is won in increments and that success are baby steps, not paradigm shifts. It's baby steps. It's getting the group to tell a story of what happened. It's getting a leader to ask how we got here, what conditions were necessary for this failure to take place. That's really important. right? Change fails or is pushed back upon when one change involves many other changes. So the unintended consequence of change, what else must change, is significant. I've always said this, and tell me if you think I'm right. The group that has the most skin in the game for not changing safety is safety, right? And the reason is because they've got a vested interest in keeping, number 3, the status quo going. Because say what you will about the status quo, but it's comfortable. And if you don't believe me, try this little experiment. Sleep on the other side of the bed. I double dog dare you. Because first of all, I know standing in front of you, you can't. It's going to suck and be weird, and nobody's going to be happy. Let's just put that out there. But the status quo is comfortable. The fourth one, this idea that early on, the benefits of the change are going to be unclear. And so the communication that we talk about, and really more importantly, the success stories that we share become vital because they help us move resistance. So Nick, to bring it up again, because I think it's brilliant, is the 50 lit things. What was it called? Lit 50 sounds like a marijuana thing in Vegas. Like, let me just ask, how many of you have actually been to Lit 50 this week? I should have done one of those Fidos. I'd have probably got some honest. The Lit 50.
We were actually able to register lit at AA.com.
Smell you, Nancy Drew. You know why you got that? No one else wants it. Right? But that Lit 50 is brilliant because what it is the story of success. One of the most amazing things I've ever seen is Shahika. Do you guys know Shahika? If you don't, you should. She had workers make these little TikTok videos, and all they talked about was change. And it was incredibly powerful because early on the benefits of change are unclear. Change is always broad and always vague. That's what change is. I promise you. And it becomes less broad and less vague as we become more in tune to what the change is going to happen. We stop our efforts too soon. Let me just repeat that. We stop our efforts too soon. The first time they push back, that's not stop, that's find a new strategy. Remember, if your leadership team is pushing back on you, it's not the leadership team, it's you. What that means is your messaging is not successfully going to where it needs to go to. So when they push back, all they're telling you as nicely as they can is you need to find a different way to bring this information to me so that I can sort of digest it, swallow it, hear it, listen to it, and eventually act on it. And then finally, and probably the kicker, certainly the theme of what Martha talked about, is I think the biggest change that we try to make is that we try to change other people. We don't change people. People change, but you're not in charge of that. You learn that really early. If you've ever raised kids or dogs or fallen in love, you learn pretty quickly that you aren't in charge of changing other people. The world would be a way better place if you were. I'll grant you. You've got the power. But that's just not how it works. Now, where does this all take us? Well, ultimately, it takes us to this. In the last 30 years, a lot has changed. And I think we owe it to each other to talk about it. Because I think there's some things that I'd like to sort of highlight, and I'd be super interested what you think about the things I'm going to highlight. Because I'm going to suggest we can take ideas that 30 years ago we held as near sacred. We believed these were true. We taught thousands of classes where we said these things out loud. And now we're in a world where it's different. And I think it has to start with human error. The craziest thing about this journey we've been on, the craziest thing about what you've brought to this community is that this has changed dramatically, probably within your lifetime while you're doing this work. Because if you remember, In the old days, we thought human error was something that you managed and removed. Remember? And we had all sorts of elegant ways to talk about it. I mean, elegant ways to talk about it. You know what we should do? We should go out and find error-likely situations, remove the error-likely situation, and therefore then the error will go away. What's crazy about this idea is that we held this as sacred. And I'm going to make a point, and again, I'm open for discussion. I think we needed to think that. In fact, I think your organization, as they go this journey, they need to think initially that error is something that you can manage. Because if they don't think it's something they can manage, it's almost overly consuming intellectually. It's frightening to think that people just screw up. Except that in this room, this afternoon, I'm with people who all know that people just screw up. And in fact, we're so smart, we will tell you the best people screw up more than the screw-ups do. And the really good people at screwing up get to be human performance professionals and sit in this room. So if you think about it, this is really important, because this idea that somehow error is manageable, that was super seductive. And then we started to learn, and we started reading, and other people in other disciplines started talking to us, and incredible works came out. And we talked at each other. We talked at the lunch line. We talked in the cafeteria. We talked on rides. We talked about this, and what we realized is that, in fact, error is normal. And it happens all the time. And because error is normal, our systems must learn to tolerate error. In fact, one of the more freeing things that we do for our organizations is to say, you will not have perfect workers in a perfect system doing perfect work. This game's won or lost in your ability to recover. And what's amazing about that is once you sort of take away that bias that we can remove error, and you start to build into the conversation that really good systems, really good practices, really good procedures, really good processes, really good rules, really good regulations are characterized because the conditions they bring are the ability to tolerate a mistake. You don't want to work in a place that can't tolerate a mistake. You definitely don't want to eat in a restaurant that can't tolerate a mistake, unless you like the taste of spit. Some of you might. I'm not judging. We can do a Slido. This change, I think, is foundational. And I want to bring it up because I actually think this change is not only foundational, but I think it's actually a really good place to start this discussion. Because this isn't the only sacred cow that we had to learn. In fact, if you go from error, the next place you should probably go is to how we define safety. Now, if you ask me, you haven't, but if you did accidentally, I would tell you the one change that I think has the most legs in our organization is getting safety to be defined differently. So the traditional definition of safety, you guys all know it, so this isn't terribly, incredibly interesting, but we define safety by the absence of injury, or the absence of harm, or zero accidents. I mean, we could go on a long time on this one. And what's weird is that traditionally we've measured it, and the regulators ask us to measure it by actually counting the number of people we hurt to show how far away we are from having a complete absence of harm. Now, what's interesting is that this is and has been pretty much the ultimate understanding of safety. To this day, if you go to an organization that's near and dear to you and ask them what is safety, they'll tell you everybody goes home safely. Nobody gets hurt. There's no injuries, there's no harms. That's okay. And I actually think, again, progressively, that's a pretty important foundational beginning to this discussion, because you can't run until you learn to walk. Why the hell you're running? Different story. There are cars, you guys, and they're way faster. Just saying, right? What's happened in the 30 years we've been together is that this definition slowly and surely is changing. Where safety was once the absence of a negative, what we've come to know is that safety now is the presence of a positive. Because we know, because really, really, really smart people before us have studied systems. And here's what they say. You don't make a system more stable by removing risk, because risk is super normal, super dynamic, and always present. You make a system better by adding capacity, by adding barriers and controls, practices, policies, procedures, leadership, clear communication, psychological safety. The conditions we all talk about in our little discussion are the very things that we provide to create that safety. But this is so important, because until this work is done, your organization is going to quest after the idea of nothing happening. The problem is that nothing happening doesn't really mean nothing's happening. In fact, we're in a room full of people who will look you in the eye and tell you, if nothing's happening, a lot is happening. So where does that take us? Pyramid. Oh, there's an extra F in there. Sorry. I didn't mean to do that. That was a typo. I worked that joke a long time. You should have seen me retyping this morning. Should I leave the F? Should I take the F out? I thought it's funnier with the F, so I went with it. This change is a big one. And to me, if you ask me which one I'm most passionate about, which one I care the most about, this is it. And here's what I know. Really, really, really safe organizations still have failure. In fact, let me just say, the safest organizations in the world still fail. The difference is that they fail successfully. And the only way you can fail successfully is to give up the idea that somehow the pyramid is predictive. So I understand completely why for years we believed, I mean hardcore believed, I mean posters in your training room. I mean your boss could talk about this in meetings. I mean we believe this. And what we believed is that fatalities are the logical result of increasing injuries. Therefore, if we're going to study logic, are you ready? If we want to remove the logical result, we therefore must remove the increasing injuries. So, if this is true, managing ankle sprains and paper cuts aggressively will in fact reduce fatalities. How do you feel? This is you. It's complete crap. The things that kill workers are not the same things that hurt workers. If you ask me, what do you say that matters the most? I kind of think it would be this. Because near as I can tell, the one thing that I'm passionate about is not how many workers sprain their ankle. I mean, good Lord, you guys. Have you been out to the field where you work? It's like a giant ankle spraining simulation center. Seriously, I mean, what's wrong with us, right? I don't really give a crap about how many people get a paper cut, and neither does the organization. We probably wouldn't even count that one, right? What I do care about is a guy that doesn't go home. What I do care about is doing a fatality investigation. And the crazy thing is that every one I've ever done, and I'm with my friends here, there are people in this room who've also done many. They don't start like this. You don't go into the company and they say, we should have seen this coming. We're stupid. Because this worker, first of all, he had 9 ankle sprains in 3 years. And then he broke 2 legs, and then he hurt his hip, and now he's dead. No, that's not how they say. What they usually say to you is the same thing you hear every time you go to a fatality. He's a really good guy. Safety leader, one of our best workers. Got a family, just had a new kid. He's dead. Near as I can tell, Mr. Heinrich, that's not following your frickin' pyramid. And I would suggest this one does more to defeat harm than anything we can do. but we're not done. Did you even imagine this much change has happened? Because these are things we held sacred. We made posters and put them on the wall. I mean, this was gospel. Work. We've talked about it a ton. This, to me, is the most interesting part of the whole world, is that we think work is complicated but simple, right? Complicated but simple. Simple to understand, right? So we saw work execution as kind of a linear function. Do step 1, then do step 2, then do step 3, then do step 4, then do step 5. And you're done, right? We made timelines. We made algorithms. We built software around this idea that this linear function must somehow create the work we want. What's amazing is in this room now, there's absolutely no doubt at all that work is complex, and that worker adaptivity creates success, and work is many things, but work is never simple. In fact, what's amazing is work is context-rich. It's complex. It meets all the tests that you learn this very morning. So what's next? Well, who owns safety? This one I think is exciting, because I've always thought it was kind of weird that safety got to be its own little department. But I liked it because that's who paid me. So I was pretty happy to be a part of it. And we always had cool hats and bottle openers and stuff. I mean, it was a pretty good place to be, right? Jackets, flashlights. We had intrinsically safe flashlights and box cutters that won't cut you or, by the way, open a box, but they were there. But I always knew, and I remember in this meeting years and years ago, Tony, you probably remember this too, where people would get up and say, someday I dream of the day when safety goes away. And what's crazy is that, in fact, I kind of think that's happening now. Even in this room today, there are many more people who have strong ops orientation or quality orientation or excellence orientation, that side of the house, that are genuinely concerned about system resilience and reliability. And what I think is most amazing is that where once we looked at injuries and that was the target, we're now really looking at how the operation functions. And we're learning it's weird, if you make it more efficient for them to get parts, they also don't get hurt as much and they do work quicker. This is weird, and that's exactly the shift that's happening. Because we come from a world where safety was the responsible owner of all stuff safety, right? But what's happened, and it's happening even as we speak, is that in reality, safety is an operational function that does not require nor is different from actual performance of work. The one thing we know in this room is that the workers doing work today, while we're in this lush former Ritz-Carlton meeting room, you know that, right? You can always tell a Ritz-Carlton, the toilets are low and sleek, because rich people poop differently than you do. Okay? Here's what we know, is that those workers doing work today, they don't have a part of their brain that's quality. They don't have another section of their brain that's safety. They don't have a section of their brain that's production. They got their brain, and they're managing all three at one time. To me, the one gift we are going to give the world, among the zillions of things you give them anyway, is the fact that we can finally make a conversation that says, if we make it easy to do work well, we will perform work well. I'm not a genius. You going to blow up? Is that your ring? Because that may be the best ring ever, because I could ignore that baby like that. So what's next? You excited? Let's talk about how we fit. So first and foremost, let's talk about the worker's role. Now, I don't know how you feel about this one. But if you ask me what are the 3 big messages we should deliver with consistency, because consistent communication really matters, because it builds fluency and vocabulary. We've talked about that, right? I would tell you the first message, the message number 1, the message that matters the most is this one. In the old days, we believed that the worker was the problem to be fixed. Now, I know this sounds offensive. And I know that this gets some hackles up, and people get kind of motivated. And I don't mean this to be offensive or anger-inducing or even rude, but I promise you, when you guys rolled out your behavioral-based safety program, it was rolled at the workers. You probably didn't do a whole lot of observation of safe behavior in the C-suite, right? Did you? Nope. Say what you will, but we carried the belief that if we're going to make our company safer, our people need to act more safe. And we beat that horse until that horse could not run anymore. We spent billions of dollars. We spent zillions of hours. We tracked stupid crap on the back of little cards that people submitted that they made up on their way to submit the card. And I'm not sure we benefited. But I'm not anti-behavioral-based safety. Don't get me wrong. What I think it did was at a fundamental level put the emphasis in the wrong place. We were telling workers they had to be safer. And near as I can tell, please correct me, I've given you a lot of opportunities, they're the people that care the most about being safe. I don't necessarily think they need someone to say, hey, you should not chop your head off. Generally, workers look at you and say, that is a good idea, thank you. Now, if you leave, I'm going back to work, right? I mean, that's what they say. And so what's happened, and this is the powerful thing I think we've done, is we've helped the organization understand the shift. And the shift is the worker's not the problem. The worker, Dave, this is your quote, brother. Do you recognize this? I can tell you when you said this. The worker's the problem solver. We struggled for years with this. In the olden days, we'd say, we have to harness the worker, right? Well, so that doesn't feel right. I mean, unless you're into that, it is Vegas. And I'm pretty sure in fact, I know there are places you can go to, Dave, and I've been there, right? This problem solver idea is really powerful. And what you're doing is you're really putting the emphasis back to where it belongs. And that emphasis back to where it belongs, that's a really, really important part of the conversation. The worker is not the problem. The worker is the problem solver. So let's go one more time to my hospital story. So I go to San Antonio because I'll pretty much go anywhere for a puffy taco. And if you've not had one, you don't know. But if you've had one, you know why I would go anywhere for a puffy taco. And I go to this meeting, and I don't know what I think it's going to be. I mean, Rob, do you do a lot of homework? I'm just like lucky to get there. And I'm always kind of surprised the plane makes it. Sorry. But I was pretty convinced at any point before you presented, they'd come and say, we're going to have a 20-minute delay. Can't tell you anything before Nick gets up there, but it's going to be 20 minutes. And then 20 minutes he'd say, it's going to be another 20. And then they'll say, Nick is canceled. You can go home. That's what they were going to say. That's what I thought was going to happen, right? So I fly to this meeting, and there's like 4,000 people at this meeting. It's a big stinking meeting. I thought it'd be like 6 people and tacos. I mean, that's why I went. And everyone in that room was a nurse or a doctor, and they all worked at children's hospitals. So this SPS is only children's hospitals. And I tell you this story because I really want you to reach out to them because they want your help and they need your help. And the cool thing about children's hospitals, different than like adult hospitals, is people that work in children's hospitals, super irreverent. They, by definition, think rules are stupid and that if they're going to save the life of a child, screw it. They are truly the definition of act and seek forgiveness later. The whole group. They're also incredibly dry, kind of dark humor because they work with tragedy all the time. And so they were really interesting. And I don't know if you guys, do you have your own sort of set of core rules that you kind of guide your life by? Do you? Like I have a couple. One is you should never sit on a plane seat next to the bathroom. If you don't have that rule, you should take it. Because it just changes the entire flight if you're not next to the lavatory. And the other rule, I really only have 2. The other rule I have is little kids shouldn't die. That's just one of my rules. It's right up there with the bathroom lavatory. I don't know which one's most important. They're kind of both mutually important, right? So we go to this meeting, and they tell this story. And it was amazing. They talked about premature babies and NICU intensive care units, ICUs. So everybody with me so far? So what I learned right from the get-go is they don't call premature babies preemies because that's kind of dehumanizing. You know what they call them? Anyone know? Little people. Think about that. That's amazing. And they said the crazy thing about a premature baby is that every premature baby is going to need oxygen. And the sweet spot when they intubate the baby is 2 centimeters. You probably know all about this. I mean, this is your world, right? 2 centimeters. So they have a 2 centimeter sweet spot when they stick the tube in. It has to be in that area. And if it's not in that area, then the baby stops breathing, which means the heart stops beating, which means the baby then goes to code or dies. And again, you can probably reinforce this better than I can, but little premature babies will have 3 and 4 heart attacks a day. Did you know this? Well, you did. You know how this is going to end too, right? The amazing thing is they said we lived with that for the last 75 years because nobody could think how to fix that problem. Because you know what that problem is? It's too hard to solve. We can't solve it. And then 2 years ago, they picked up something on the web by an organization. You're probably not going to know it, so I'm going to say it really slow. INPO. So first of all, how they found this completely escapes me. It really does escape me. And they started looking at book 1, book 2. This is old school, you guys. This is 30 years ago crap. This is back when we thought we could manage air. And they said, you know what, we ought to try this. So they had a contest. They picked 15 hospitals across North America, and they said, this summer is the summer of stopping, help me say this word, excavation? Is that right? Say it again. Extubation. That sounds made up, kind of. Here, you say it, and then I'll act like I'm saying it. Okay, now hold on, wait. Okay, give me a little. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Extubation.
Thank you. That was good, right? And so what they did is ask the people who do the work what the problem is and how to solve it. And then, because they're smarter than we are, they had a contest. And at the end of the summer, they had a pep rally with 1,000 people and pom-poms. Anything that got pom-poms, that's another level. I mean, I don't know about your company. Very few pom-poms where I work. I'm not saying we're anti-pom-pom, but we're not pro-pom-pom. And they solved the problem. Not with 1 solution, not with 2 solutions, but with 5 solutions. That, my friends, is the work you're doing. And what's weird is we weren't even there. It's not even our deal. Like, I don't even get all that stuff. And yet we were. Because one book led to another book, which led to a video, which led to a phone call, and people started learning. And they got better. And the reason they got better is because they realized that the people who can solve this problem were the people who dealt with it every single day. The role of procedures. I don't know what to say about this because I never want to sound anti-procedure, but in the 30 years that this organization has been around, we have really done some heavy lifting on how we think about procedures. Because procedures at first for us were a solution. And we truly believe that safety lives on paper and that procedure and procedure adherence and compliance was the one right way to get work done. And we sold that idea everywhere. In fact, we audit to that idea. We formalized that idea. We made that signal really, really clear. And then really smart people came in and said, the problem with procedures is they hate variability. That the best plan a pilot can make in the flight deck of an American Airlines plane can't plan for an unexpected event. And if you don't tell them what runway they're going to be on, they can't plan for anything. And what's amazing is introducing variation and variability into our conversation helped us build the case that the world is not a linear system. But to get there, we had to sort of admit air was normal, and we had to admit that the pyramid was not right. And you can kind of see as we build this case that this sort of makes sense. This is where we went, which then took us to our role. This is the one I probably think about the most, is how our role has changed in the last 30 years. I don't know if you think about this, but as you get older and things start to change, you start to have a different look when you look back in time. Because if you remember, in the olden days, you used to be the youngest, smartest, shiniest gun in the meeting. Remember this? And you were surrounded by just groups of these silver-haired buffaloes that always could tell you 150 different ways this ain't going to work. And then the weirdest thing happened, you guys. Time marched on, and you became the old buffalo. You became the very thing you thought you'd never become. It's the weird, and you hear him saying, I mean, you say stuff that you thought, I'm never going to say that, but you say it, because that's how it happens. Ultimately, blame and punishment are learn and improve. It's funny to me how this has really caught air, but not because we've done a lot to make this catch air. It's just because this is really foundational to being a human being. And in the old days, we sort of fell for this fundamental attribution. And if you remember this, because you've heard it a million times, we name them, blame them, shame them, and retrain them. And if you look, it's embarrassing, but if you look in your company's history, you will find case after case after case after case where that's exactly what we did. Guy cuts hand with knife. Everyone gets to go to knife safety training. Then we take knives away. Then we send everybody to not knife using training. Then we have knife police at the gate making sure you don't have a knife. Near as I can tell, pumpkins, we fixed nothing, but we feel like we did. What's amazing is, in this room, learning is a fundamental value. And now we live in organizations that almost against their will are being forced to default towards improvement. Part of that is because of the work you do. Part of that is not letting them have blame, not letting them have normal, but telling them this event happened. It's either a cost or an opportunity. Let's see it as an opportunity. Ultimately, that takes us to our learning target. It's funny how our investigations and learning opportunities have changed in the last 30 years. It's funny because 30 years ago, I would have told you going to a class taught by a criminologist to really learn how to take witness statements, probably a really good idea, and I can't wait to get my guys there. Because in the old days, I think we looked at investigations as a way really to drive liability away from the organization. Now, you can look at that with the big liability, L, lawyers and reputations, but I also think you could look at it the way Martha talked about it, which is it's a lot easier to get new people than it is to write a new procedure. And so we sort of built this argument that we would look directly at who failed. Because when we identify who fails, it's really quite elegant. It's emotionally satisfying. It's quick. We sort of know what to do with them because most of our organizations use safety as a way to manage performance problems anyway, so it's really not a big question. We'll just remove this bad person from a really, really good system. But what's amazing, and if you think about it, this is one of the success stories we can tell, is that over time, we've slowly but surely drug our organizations kicking and screaming into the realization that the much richer question is what failed. And the one thing I think this has taught me is that initially we ask our organizations to seek behavior that would explain failure first, and then seek system weaknesses to support that behavior. I would suggest you guys, and tell me if I'm wrong, that that's exactly opposite. That when we seek system weaknesses, what we find is reasons for behavioral outcomes. That's never more illustrated than when we learn. And you know this because we've talked about it a bunch. We used to really wait for something to happen to get smarter. I don't really understand why, with maybe one exception, and that is I think we thought our systems, practices, and processes were perfect. So we had to wait for it to fail to actually go in and learn about our system, right? What's amazing is now what we know is that we have to study normal work. That this idea of understanding normal work not only gives us a better, more accurate reflection of what's happening, but also, and more importantly, it allows us the ability to understand what systems are functioning well. We're moving slowly but surely from an audit mindset to a validation and verification mindset. And what's amazing, and I'll just say, I don't think audits will go away. I think audits play an important role, but audits aren't a good way to understand normal work. When you send an auditor into the field, what is the auditor going to find? Yeah, because if they don't find anything, they're a sucky auditor, right? I don't know how you train your guys around auditors. You know what I do? The first thing I do when we prep for an audit, a big audit, is I bring the team together in a room and I say, I'm going to ask you a question, and how you answer this is going to determine how we move forward with your access to the auditor. And then I ask this question, ready? Do you know what time it is? What's the answer to that? Okay, that will get you far with an auditor. Yeah. What is the answer to that question? Do you know what time it is? Yes. The only answer to that question is yes, right? If you tell them what time it is, you're giving the auditor too much information, right? Answer what the auditor asks and only what the auditor asks, and that will keep us safe. So where does this take us? Well, the choice. So I actually think this one's big. This is a change that I can tell you came in my life that is a direct result of being a part of an organization like this. Because I come from a world where I honestly thought bad things happened because workers made bad choices. Now, I tried to do that in a way that was learning focused, that was improvement focused, and really not terribly blameworthy. What I realized on this journey from the stories you tell is that it's very rarely workers making bad choices. It's almost always workers having bad choices. And what's amazing is when you start to think about it this way, this becomes a relatively profound shift in how you think. So if you do a big accident and they say, well, the problem is this crew did not follow our hoisting and rigging procedure. And so you say, oh, okay, so let's just explore that a little. How much hoisting and rigging training have you had? And the group says, none. Did they choose to not follow your hoisting and rigging procedure? Or did you put them in a position where they had no access to your hoisting and rigging procedure? That's not making a bad choice, that's having a bad choice. And that difference makes a huge shift in the way we think. This leads us to the concept of cause. This one, my friends, in an organization that was formerly called HPRCT, has the potential to be a little bit sticky. Let's hold through it and love each other. Ready? Early on, we were desperate and involved and focused on cause. And cause made a ton of sense. And root cause even made more sense because it helped demystify the event and it gave our leadership a very clear thing to fix. Tell me what to fix and I will fix it. The challenge is, in 1994, is that it meant we didn't tell a lot of the rest of the story. because there wasn't a place to tell the rest of the story. In 1994, we didn't have a lot of pull-down menus, but as we progressed through computer sensitivity, we started to build cause analysis tools that uniformed causal identification across the enterprise. Here's what we learned. As we become more mature and as we learn more on this journey, we realize that cause is important, but the context-rich description of how the event happened, including causal analysis, becomes much more effective. If you want different answers, ask different questions. If you want better corrective actions, do better problem identification. Which takes us ultimately to snack time. This is my final one, but this probably is the most important to me. The one thing that I've seen change dramatically since 1994 to 2024 is the snacks. In the old days, you guys, you probably won't believe this, but at break, they would have donuts. Millions of donuts. Almost unlimited donuts. Nobody cared if you ate a donut. In fact, you were probably a better person because of eating donuts. What scares me now is that you'll go to a meeting and they're going to serve bottled friggin' water and a GD kale salad. What the hell was that? You know why we had that kale salad for lunch? Do you know? Have you thought about this? You know the answer? Big kale is involved in our menu selection. They're everywhere. Big kale is trying to ruin the world. Because near as I can tell you guys, kale is not food. Kale's not even decoration. Kale's something you put greasy stuff on because it's kale. Right? That change is profound in our lifetime of this organization. The year passed, the worker's the problem. We make our organization by asking workers to be more safe. We tell our workers what to do or what not to do, and we define safety as the absence of harm. The present, the worker's not the problem, the worker's the solution. We make our organization safer by making our systems more robust and more resilient. We don't tell workers what to do, we ask workers what they need, and we define safety as the presence of capacity. Those are important, but what I'm excited about is the next 30 years. Now, thank God I won't be here. But here's my advice. Knock yourselves out. Piss people off. Get caught doing it right. And be as brave for the next 30 years as you have been for these 30 years. What do you think? Last slide, you ready for it? I don't know if you noticed. How many of you stayed in the hotel? Most of you? Did you see? Last night was a big day for me, you guys. This was in my hotel room. It's in your hotel room, too. Want to know why this is a big deal? You guys, I didn't even know they made professional toilet paper. Seriously, that's like using the drapes. That thing's amazing. Charles, they're all yours, baby.